Okay, campers, here we go again. Hope you had a good break, a water fight or something. Our next break, we're going to do something really exciting, or at least I'll suggest something really exciting, so you'll want to hang around for that. By the way, what's the best part about going to the movies? I think you'd have to agree it's a little bit of popcorn, a little bit of pop. And I'm going to work on my bag of popcorn. Why don't you push the pause button, go make yourself some popcorn, and come right back. Got some pretty neat things to share with you. So I'll wait for you, okay, while I eat my popcorn. All right. Well, it took you longer than I thought you would, and my popcorn's all gone. But you can enjoy yours. Evolutionary philosophers, and I don't call them scientists, they're more philosophers. They're coming up with a conclusion they want and then so-called mixing science with it. But evolutionary philosophers, they tell us that dinosaurs lived 100 million years ago, and they all died about 65 million years ago. Millions and millions of years. Is that really true? Well, real scientists, people that can measure things that are happening right now, things that they can observe, a scientist at the Greenwich Observatory in England and the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., they discovered something really cool. They've been making measurements for over 180 years. They have these telescopes, and they've been very carefully keeping record and making measurements. You know what they've discovered? They discovered that the sun is slowly shrinking. Now, that shouldn't surprise us. It's a consumable energy source, like a bonfire. And if you don't keep throwing logs on it, as you know, the fire gets smaller and smaller. Well, the sun is shrinking. Not very much. It's about 5 feet a day. That sounds like a lot, but it's not. The sun is very big. The sun is shrinking 1/10 of 1% every 100 years. Every century, it gets a little smaller, about 1/10 of 1%. That means that it shrinks about 1% every 1,000 years. When Jesus was here 2,000 years ago, the sun would have been about 2% smaller than it is now. And that's not enough to hardly even affect the temperature on planet Earth. But if you go back 100,000 years, then at the present rate that the sun is being consumed, 100,000 years ago, the sun would have been twice the size it is right now. And all the water on planet Earth would boil. I mean, where are you going to get a cold drink of water when all the water is boiling, right? If you go to Yellowstone National Park, you will see an example of what happens because of boiling water. That boiling water comes out of those hot pools, and any trees that are there, boom, they're dead. They can't grow. Animals can't live in boiling water, neither can plants or trees or anything else. And that would have been just 100,000 years ago. 100,000 years ago, there would have not been food for the dinosaurs to even eat. And even 50,000 years ago, the surface of the earth would have been so hot that nothing could have lived here. Now let's use our imagination and go back 1,000,000 years. 1,000,000 years ago, the sun would have been twice the size, 20 times the size it is right now. I mean, you talk about a bad sunburn. You'd have got scorched in just a few seconds' time. Even Barbie dolls would melt right down to a little puddle of plastic. 1,000,000 years ago, in fact, they tell us that the increased gravitational pull would have taken Earth and the moon and just gobbled it up, sucked us right into the center of the sun. Now imagine the size of the sun 1,000,000,000 years ago. 1,000,000,000 is 1,000 million. I mean, that's a lot of million. That's a long time. And if the sun was continuing to be consumed, all those billions of years. I'm telling you, the sun would have been huge. And yet evolutionary philosophers, they insist, oh yeah, life began billions of years ago on planet Earth. You know what? They know that's not true. So why do they tell us this ridiculous lie? It's like one well-known evolutionist said, well, if you don't believe in evolution, I guess you have to believe in God. And I'm not going to have some God tell me what I can do. In our last session, we learned that God created all the plants and animals after their own kind. That is, animals are put into a group of species, and they're created after their own kind, and they can't mix those species. Dinosaurs couldn't come from fish, and man didn't come from monkeys, and you can't mix dogs and cats or horses and cows. During this session, we want to consider the question, I wonder if people ever saw living dinosaurs. Wouldn't that be something? Wouldn't that be something if you could find a dinosaur today and take pictures of it, and you might want to be ready to run if he's hungry, right? But the Paluxy River near Glen Rose, Texas, that's a neat place to go. They have a state park there called Dinosaur Valley. And families go there, the kids love, they got great big replicas of dinosaurs and stuff, but you can go down on the bottom of the river and you can find dinosaur tracks. Some of them are still underwater, and kids will get in the water and they'll see these dinosaur tracks. And for years, families have gone down to the Paluxy River. It's a great place for picnics and outings. The water is pretty shallow, so it's safe for kids. And families go down there. Years ago, there was a family down there, and this little girl was walking along. She said, whoa, there's a dinosaur track. And her little brother said, that's nothing. Over here, there's a human track. And they were all in the same bedrock. A dinosaur and human tracks, all on the same rock. That's interesting. It means they had to have been there at the same time. It's like making a handprint in concrete. Here's a little cartoon figure, Grimmy, and he's walking right down some wet cement. He's making his mark, and it'll be there for a long time. But those animals have to walk on that cement, or kids have to put their hand in the cement when it's wet. And if they wait until tomorrow morning, the concrete will be dry and they can't do it. And the same is true of those dinosaurs and humans. They had to have been there at about the same time, not millions of years ago. And some of the philosophers, evolutionists said, oh, that's impossible, because dinosaurs all died 65 million years ago. And so they one summer they brought this big earth moving machine down. A scientist by the name of Don Patton hired the thing, and they moved some of the rock that was next to the bottom of the river. They got down to bedrock, and guess what they found? They found more of those dinosaur tracks and human tracks. It's amazing. Here's a print of a dinosaur track that came out of the Paluxy River. By the way, look at the size of that. He must have been a basketball player. I mean, it's huge. But did you know the Bible says in Genesis chapter 6 that there were giants in the earth in those days? Some of those prints of the dinosaur or the human tracks are 6 feet apart. He was either taking a big stride like a giant would, or else running like crazy. Maybe chasing a dinosaur, or a dinosaur was chasing him. We don't know. But it's pretty fascinating, these human and dinosaur tracks, all of them at the same time. Dinosaurs were not on the earth millions of years ago. That's just not true. In fact, they were here not too long ago, and some people have actually seen them. The Native Americans especially left records on the rock, and sometimes we refer to those as petroglyphs and pictographs. A petroglyph is something scratched onto the rock, is permanent. Here's a picture of a petroglyph. It's found at Grand Canyon. And then pictographs were painted on the rock. But it's an amazing thing. You go down to the Grand Canyon, and here's this image of what's called an Edmontosaurus. And you know, the park ranger will tell you, that's nothing recent. That's over 1,000 years old. Well, somebody saw something 1,000 years ago. And if you go to Kachina Bridge at Bridges National Monument, same thing. You find these interesting, this would be another petroglyph that certainly looks like a dinosaur. But one of the most fascinating ones is up in Canada. This is at Lake Superior Provincial Park in Ontario. And there's no doubt that the creature that the pictograph there shows the sawtooth along the back. And it's very similar to what we'd refer to as a Stegosaurus. And also seemed in the same drawing to be large lizards. And for years I've been showing that to the campers at Broken Arrow, and I've wondered, what in the world is that thing? And one year one of the campers said, "Hey, that thing is a canoe with people in it." I think he's right. Maybe they're chasing this Stegosaurus. I don't know. If you go to Wapatki National Monument, Arizona, same thing. The park rangers will show you this, and this thing's over 1,000 years old. And they even refer to it as Puff the Magic Dragon. Looks like a fire-breathing dragon. What did those native people see 1,000 years ago? But 2,500 years ago, even before the time of Christ, there were figurines that were buried in the dirt down in a place called Acambaro, Mexico, not too far from Mexico City. 33,000 of them. And you know what? The majority of them are dinosaurs. How'd they know what dinosaurs look like? They didn't have National Geographic. They didn't have the Discovery Channel. They were seeing something that we don't see in today's world. And they were made out of clay and then fired in an oven, so they're very permanent. And people dig them up all the time, and there's thousands of these things. Dr. Patton also went over to Cambodia. He heard about this Cambodian temple that was now closed and nobody's there. But there were columns there with amazing engravings of animals, tropical animals. And one of them is an engraving of that Stegosaurus, one of the sawtooth on its back. And that's 1,100 years old when they made that temple. 1,000 years ago, down in Peru, somebody made this weaving, very similar to what we see today with the Navajo weavings. I'd love to have that, add that to my collection. Wow. But that's not a camel, folks, that's a dinosaur. And then there were historians like Herodotus. He was a Greek explorer, and he described small flying reptiles in Egypt and Arabia. Aristotle, same thing. He saw these things. Wouldn't that be a cool pet? Well, maybe not. You'd have to clean up for them, after them, and they're probably pretty big. Even Marco Polo, who lived 700 years ago, he was an explorer in China, and he wrote a book, The Travels of Marco Polo, and he described huge dinosaur reptiles. Some of them were used to pull the chariot of the emperor of China. So why don't people believe the historians? If they don't want to believe the pictures on the rocks and the stuff that they dig up, the figurines in Mexico, certainly they would believe the historians, but they don't. Why don't they believe the historians? Well, 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 to 5 says this: "There shall come in the last days scoffers." Scoffers are people that mock others, you know. There shall come in the last days scoffers walking after their own lust, after their own immorality. And then it says, "For this they are willingly ignorant, that God destroyed the world by a flood, and that God's going to destroy the world again in the future by fire. And this they are willingly ignorant." I don't know if you know what that term, willingly ignorant, means, but it actually means dumb on purpose. This guy, he's kind of dumb on purpose. These guys are making funny faces, acting like they're dumb on purpose. But to really be dumb on purpose is when you do this. I don't want to hear it. Don't tell me the truth. I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I already got my mind made up. That's really being dumb on purpose. So what happened to all the dinosaurs? We'll talk about the next session, and I hope you hang around. But I hear the bell ringing, and so we got to go. You got to take another break. But on this break, you could do something really exciting. You could go outside and make a big mud pit and have a mud fight. Doesn't that sound exciting? Pretty cool. Don't tell your mom and dad I suggested that. And be sure and hose yourself off before you go back in the house. But go have some fun. And we'll see you in a few minutes.